The 457th edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
And that could make a difference. Lawson at the buzzer. Got it! Maybe not. Ty Lawson wins it at the buzzer.
Deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Gets the roll. Here we go. Page has it. Carolina down one. 84-83. Page into the front court with 4 seconds. Page to the rim. Got it! 9/10 of a second to go. Inbounds. Washington gets it to Warren. His full court shot. No good. Marcus Page baby. Does it for the Tar Heels. Carolina wins it.
Don't force it if you're Goss.
Comes in. Blocked by Meeks. Buried up ahead to Jackson. And he tucks it down for the 5-point lead. Matthews off the mark. And this year, the confetti is going to fall for North Carolina. They're not going to be denied this time. Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another live edition of the Four Corners podcast coming at you here on a Tuesday night. Josh and Anthony joined with you once again. Here to talk about some Carolina basketball recruiting as earlier today, as you well know, the Heels missed out on the number one player in the 2025 class. And we're here to talk about it because it is significant that once again Carolina finds itself competing for one of the best players, whether at the high school level or out of the transfer portal, and they wind up not getting him. And so we're here to talk about the ramifications of missing out on A.J. Dybantsa earlier today. Before we do that, though, we'll give you the pod thought of the day. We've used this one before, but it seemed pretty appropriate after what happened last night. We go to legendary basketball coach Dean Smith for the pod thought, and that thought is, quote, "This is a women's soccer school. We're just trying to keep up," end quote. Of course, if you follow Carolina athletics, you know that the women's soccer program won another national championship last night, defeating Wake Forest to capture, I think it's their 22nd NCAA title, 23rd overall championship in women's soccer. Just absolutely dominance for that program. Doing so with an interim head coach who, like Hubert Davis, although he wasn't an interim, sent Duke's coach into retirement in the Final Four on their way to the national title game. But unlike the men's basketball team, the women, they were able to complete the job and win the national championship. And just want to send congratulations to them. Just another example of why this athletic department, top to bottom, is the best in all of college athletics. Let's get to why we're here, though. And it's these podcasts, I got to tell you, as a host, I don't like doing them. They're not fun because it usually brings upon a lot of complaining and a lot of venting. But I think at this point, it's justified for Carolina fans to be upset because A.J. Dybantsa, the number one player in the 2025 class, announced his commitment to BYU this morning on ESPN's First Take program. He chose the Cougars over UNC, Alabama, and Kansas. Carolina was officially named a finalist last week. Remember, his family was on hand for the Alabama game in the ACC-SEC Challenge. Make of that what you will, but one of the last things he did before announcing his commitment to BYU was taking a game between two schools that he was heavily considering. Going into his commitment, didn't really know where he was going to go. it was pretty much up in the air. There were some people that obviously thought he was going to BYU. Travis Branham did give him a crystal ball. There were some people that thought Alabama was going to be the school, but Carolina was right there. They made a significant commitment NIL-wise, and went as all out for a recruit as they've had in the NIL era under Hubert Davis. Unfortunately, at the end of the day, it was not enough. If you've seen the report now, it's been reported that he's going to make up to, if not more than $7 million while he'll play his one season for BYU, because he is projected to be the number one pick in the 2026 NBA draft. So the thing is here, buddy, is this follows a trend that we saw start in the transfer portal, and we've seen it now carry over to the elite of the elites at the high school level, where Carolina gets involved with a highly touted prospect. They get down to the wire with a highly touted prospect, but at the end of the day, that basketball player, whether it's a transfer portal guy or in this case AJ Dybantsa out of high school, they're choosing somewhere else to go play their college basketball other than Chapel Hill.
Yeah, I mean, this one, I don't really know how mad you can get, because this feels a lot like what we just kind of went through ourselves, dealing with the Juan Soto experience on the baseball side of things. Basically, with the investors that the BYU NIL collective has, which one of them is the owner of the Utah Jazz, it was nearly impossible. They were not going to be beat for this kid. Basically, what they were going to do was they were going to wait until the final hour and make a last-second NIL pitch to him that would be bigger than what anybody else could offer. Now, look, $7 million. I don't know if that is actually the number. Brendan Marks tweeted out right after the decision. He said, "For what it's worth, do not believe all of the NIL numbers floating around about Dybantsa's 7 figures. Yes, absolutely. Did BYU win the money battle? Also, yes. But most teams do not have $5 million in NIL to spend. Impending revenue share because of the house will strain those funds even further." So, I mean, the thing is like, I think that he certainly got a lot of money. BYU was probably not going to be beat. But I don't know if $7 million was exactly the number. Regardless, I do think that, yeah, you're kind of at a point where Tar Heel fans are frustrated with the fact that Carolina is just not landing anybody. And I don't know at this point what to believe. I don't know if it's that they don't have the NIL money. I don't know if it's that Hubert is just looking for guys that aren't worried about the NIL number. At this point, I don't think you can really take that approach anymore. That pretty much has to go out the window. This year so far is proving that probably has to go out the window. Because if you were willing to pay, then you probably would have gotten a center in here that would have been able to help Carolina in some form or fashion. Now, again, the guys that we've talked about or that we talked about in the summer, there are some guys that aren't really thriving in their current location. So I'm not saying it would be a guarantee. But I do think that at this point, that's where some of the frustration is starting to come through, is that guys, at some point, you got to be willing to pay some of these dudes. So I get the frustration from people, but I think in this particular circumstance, it's hard to get really angry because I just don't think that BYU was going to be outbid.
Well, I think money obviously played a big role in his recruitment. Any player at his talent level in this era, the NIL is going to play a role. I also think that what he pointed out from a staff perspective wise was validated. He's going to play for a coach that came from the NBA ranks, and his whole entire staff is filled with NBA guys. And for a guy that's looking to take the fastest track possible to the NBA, it does feel like going to play for a guy that is a NBA lifer who's running an NBA system surrounded by NBA assistants is not going to hurt him in his development to get to the association as quick as possible. I think what my message that I want to stress is this is why last year I stressed to y'all to enjoy and appreciate that team, because those types of teams aren't going to happen very often, where Carolina was able to bring in impactful transfers that wanted to play for North Carolina, not because of what they were getting paid to do, but what North Carolina basketball offered them. And Carolina took care of Harrison Ingram. They took care of Cormac Ryan. There were NIL commitments to those two players, to Armando Bacot. But more than anything, those guys just wanted to be a part of the program. And they wanted to be a part of what at the time we thought was restoring Carolina basketball to what we thought Carolina basketball was going to be year in, year out under Hubert Davis. And as we sit here today, 5-4 in this season and out of the AP Top 25, it's very evident that that is not the case. We've heard Bubba Cunningham talk about this when he's talking about when he's talked about the football hire publicly that he is still in the process of trying to make. Carolina, I think, as much as any school with a brand, right? And we know how impactful and powerful the brand is. That interlocking light blue NC, you go just about anywhere in the country, and people know what that means. With that being said, when the revenue sharing comes, Carolina is a brand that needs it, because as of to this point, they have not been able to compete from an NIL perspective on a year-to-year basis, on a recruit-to-recruit basis. I do think that it's shocking. I think we all thought that when NIL became what NIL became, Carolina was at the forefront, launching their NIL collectives and trying to be one of the leaders in the NIL world, but that hasn't been the case. And so I do think that probably more than Hubert Davis anticipated, I think even more so than this fan base anticipated, like the message is getting louder and clearer. If you do not have several bags to offer the types of players that we want, that we need to win at the level that we've grown accustomed to this program winning at since the 1950s, then Carolina basketball will struggle on the recruiting front to bring in the top end talent. I still think Hubert Davis can recruit a nucleus of guys that can be a core part of a championship roster. But to get the guys that are going to put you over the top and win the games that we want to win and be on the stage that we want to be at on a year-to-year basis, until Carolina's NIL becomes more of what you're seeing around the country, this will happen more often than not.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's why it's so important. I mean, as far as I know, we've never heard Carolina put someone in the position of basically being the GM. We see that teams like Duke have it, Villanova has it. Now, I mean, Villanova is probably not one to brag about at this point, but that's more because of their head coach. I think that that's probably the next step for Carolina. Would getting a significant donor, someone along the lines of maybe a Michael Jordan, something like that, that would certainly help. But I do think that you need someone that knows the ins and outs of that kind of stuff. And we've seen it that there are schools that are using that, and it's being used to their advantage. And I think that's something that I want to see become a focus. Like you, for right now, for the love of God, let's get the football hire out of the way. I mean, geez, we've been going on for over a week now. I mean, hell, you could argue even back to when they lost at James Madison or lost at home to James Madison, that they've been talking about that since then. Okay, you've got that hire. You removed the interim tag off of Damon Nahas for the women's soccer coach position. Now the focus can be a little bit on basketball. And I think that is one area that they need to focus on is finding someone that can just handle the ins and outs when it comes to recruiting, NIL, and the transfer portal stuff. Of course, Hubert is going to be involved, but that would take a lot off of his plate, and I think allow him to do what he is here to do, which is to coach these guys. Because right now, there's so much that he has to do that I think it makes it a big challenge. But yeah, I mean, until the NIL money really starts rolling in, it's going to be hard to really be angry that Carolina's missing on a lot of these guys. Now, the thing that sucks is that for us, at least from our standpoint, we have no idea how much NIL money they actually have. Even if you have a report that comes out that says that the athletic department has so and so many much NIL, millions, you still can't 100% believe that. They keep all that stuff under wraps, exactly how much money they have. But that's that's the nature of the beast, man. We've heard Mac Brown talk about it, how the football side of things didn't have a lot of money. We heard Hubert Davis during the offseason talk a little bit about it and sort of hint to the fact that there wasn't a lot of money there. So I think one of the things that we talked about last year was that, yes, you might not have a ton of NIL money up front, but you saw with guys like Elliot Cadeau, Armando Bacot, RJ Davis, eventually you will get these sponsorships because Carolina's brand is so big that you will get Marriott, you will get TurboTax. I think that was the one that Armando was doing where he was eating the burrito in the restaurant or whatever. Those are the type of things that Carolina can bring you that other places may not be able to bring you. And unfortunately, right now, I guess telling kids, look, just wait. And when you get here, eventually those things will come. I guess that selling point just isn't really working.
Well, I think what's the most concerning, disturbing, frustrating when you look at Dybantsa's recruitment individually, from everything that I was able to read and gather from Carolina's perspective, this was the most aggressive they've been up front from a commitment standpoint, because this is not a guy that was a want for Carolina. You look at the roster going into next year, this guy felt like a need and felt like a guy that, okay, if you compare him with the two other 4-star recruits that are coming in, you have a good transfer portal class. You have a chance to still be competitive next year at the level that we expect this program to be at, which is competing for ACC championships and for national championships. So when you're when you kind of shift your mindset to, okay, going all in up front, and then you don't land him, I do think it's frustrating. I also think something that Carolina is going to have to start doing is something that he talked about in his commitment to BYU, which is he feels more comfortable getting developed for the NBA there over Carolina, which in theory is a very wild statement to say out loud, because BYU basketball is not known for putting players in the NBA left and right. But you look at Carolina, and for all of our basketball prowess, it's not like we're a pro factory either. And so what I do think could really help turn the tide for Carolina from a recruiting standpoint is, and I think you're seeing it happen, is develop your high-end freshman talent, Ian Jackson, Drake Powell. Like, in the long term, would it be great for those guys to be one and done? Obviously not. You'd love to have those guys around for your program for multiple years. I do think there's a chance that Drake Powell, because he's so raw, sticks around for at least a second year. But I do think it would benefit Carolina to start bringing in, yes, this one-and-done talent, but being able to develop it and send it off to the NBA in a timely manner, so you can get some of these recruits that can feel more comfortable playing at a blue blood program that will develop them for the next level, because that certainly has not been the case the last handful of years.
Yeah, I mean, look, man, it's something that we as a fan base get very defensive over. When it's brought up to us by Duke fans, a lot of us say, well, you know what? We wouldn't really want those one and dones anyways, because we want guys that are going to be here for a while that we'll get to know and that will become program legends. And to a certain extent, that is certainly true. You, of course, are going to want guys like RJ Davis, because that's a dude that we're never going to forget. His jersey is going to go up in the rafters. There's a good chance his jersey gets retired. And I think that's special. You want that. But you want to mix it in with the guys that end up going to the NBA after 1 year. And look, as you mentioned, Ian Jackson and Drake Powell could be those guys. And I think that's what's going to be so wild, is that people are going to panic and think that this is just a complete disaster, when if you look at it, especially on the recruiting side of things, maybe you're panicking about the transfer portal, whatever. On the recruiting side of things, you're talking about Carolina potentially putting 2 guys in the lottery this year that are going to be one and dones. Like, these dudes have a legit chance to be in the lottery at the end of the year. Now, of course, we have to see how the season goes for them. As of right now, I don't know if somebody would take a risk on Powell in the lottery, because I think his offensive game still has to come along maybe a little bit more before they're going to be comfortable doing that. Ian Jackson looks like he probably will end up being a lottery guy. I think that's going to happen, especially if he starts getting more minutes for Carolina. So that's the thing, man, is people are really panicked over the fact that Carolina is not recruiting high-end talent and not putting guys in the NBA. And there's a good chance that this year could prove that to be 100% wrong, even amidst all of the panic that's going on. Now, this recruiting class, that's probably what's scaring people a little bit more. And honestly, it's kind of weird, because to me, it doesn't feel like, and maybe this is the issue that Carolina is dealing with themselves, I don't feel like anything's really changed within the last year, maybe even not a year, maybe more like 9 months. I don't feel like there's been any sort of shift when it comes to NIL and stuff like that, where now all of a sudden more guys are simply just worried about the money. How much money can you pay me? But when you go back to the transfer portal, that was pretty much the name of the game with almost every big man that was in the transfer portal that Carolina was seeking out. That was the name of the game this recruiting cycle, with all of these names that we've heard. A lot of them have been getting big NIL offers from a lot of these schools. Caleb Wilson, a guy that Carolina is now probably putting a lot of their resources towards. That's another guy that a lot of people fear it's basically just becoming a bidding war for him. It's back and forth between Kentucky, Arkansas. Carolina's in there trying to get in the mix. But there's a lot of people that think that one just simply comes down to how much money are you willing to pay up. So that's the other thing that's kind of weird, is that there seemed to be a shift to where guys, at first, it seemed like it was a balance of, I want to go to a school that I really like, I want to play for a coach that I really like, and I also want to make a little bit of NIL money. Where now it's almost starting to seem like I want to make NIL money, and I'll make every other element of wherever I land work for however long I have to be there. That's the thing that I think for Carolina, you can't give it too much longer of a feeling out process, but you need to know that if that's the way things are heading, you have to find a way to adjust.
Well, and I think what it's, when NIL became legal, there was this idea, and it made a lot of sense, because you think of your brand programs having endless cash funds, but everyone just thought that all the top talent would just go to the same 5 to 6 schools, and that hasn't been the case, because you're seeing it in both your major revenue sports that there are some programs that are better suited to compete from a financial standpoint now that their donors that are flush with cash can just legally give it away, as opposed to do it behind closed doors and make sure they weren't getting caught doing stuff illegal. Now that it's all out there in the open, it's why you've seen some of these other programs like in Arkansas that does have some basketball history and tradition, but you look at, some of their donors and what their wealth is, they can fund a roster every single year. And I also think what you're going to notice moving forward with NIL, and I don't mean to put on my business hat here, but is the return of investment. Look at the money that Ohio State's NIL collective poured into their football program. Look what Ole Miss spent on their roster this past year. What did get them? For Ole Miss, they didn't even get them a playoff spot. For Ohio State, it was national championship or bust. Yes, they made the playoff, but they're coming off a fourth straight loss to their biggest rival, and their head coach will be coaching for his job every game in the playoff. And they spent $20 million on that roster that we know of. That's what we know of. It could be more. That money's not going to be there every single year because it's not going to make sense for these people to keep donating money to a product that's not delivering the results. And so I think that's something that plays a factor in this. And also, we know that there's some new basketball arena in the works on the horizon that is going to have to be funded by donors at that turn as well. And so, when Bubba Cunningham 10 years ago decided to put the basketball facility on the back burner and build up the other facilities on campus, made a lot of sense. You're looking at it now, though, he didn't know that NIL was going to be what it became. I think you would have reversed that because you're going to have you can't keep on asking people for money. You can't ask them to fund a roster and then fund a state-of-the-art facility. Like Carolina's got money, but they don't got endless amounts of cash. Like I think some people in this fan base believe that would, dude. Outside of MJ, I don't know how many people we think have endless funds and resources.
Well, look, there's some guys that are probably high up businessmen. There are some famous people who have gone to Carolina. But the thing is that when we say famous people, we're not talking about like movie stars and things like that. Andy Griffith at one time did. But like that's the thing is you don't have these massive celebrities that are willing to pay in. And the other thing is that you got to get to a point where you're attracting maybe outsider donations. That's the point that you kind of want to get to. It's really more with football. Like if you look at Colorado, that's where they get a lot of their NIL donations. Man, those donations aren't coming from people that went to Colorado. There are some, but yeah, when you got people like Jay-Z, when you've got DJ Khaled, those types of people that are literally flying to the middle of the country to a place where they've probably never been before in their life to watch a college football game, that's how you can end up making a lot of money really quick. For Carolina, I'm not saying it's got to be like that, but you're just hoping that someone, especially Michael Jordan, that would be massive if you could get Michael Jordan to start contributing to your NIL fund. Because, man, we know Mike is loaded, man. He's got plenty of money. He's made a ton of money, from his playing career. He made a ton of money owning the Charlotte Hornets. And now he's making a ton of money owning his race team. So I think at some point, that's the big fish that you want to reel in. And yeah, maybe there are some of those other business owners that make pretty good money. Maybe they're willing to donate. That's the thing is you've got to get the biggest alumni to be able to donate. Yes, we can help it as, smaller fans. But look, man, for us, we're two dudes that work part-time jobs. Like, yeah, we're going to put our money into it. I know I've made donations to both programs in specific. But the thing is I can't put a ton of money into it. Like, it's just, that's not feasible. So yeah, it's on other people, but it's like I've said too, if you're somebody that is complaining all the time about this, Well, at some point, you have to be donating to the NIL fund yourself. If not, you can't really be that angry because we know what we have to do. It's just right now, this program doesn't have the money.
Well, and I think it's why, and Bubba sent this release out a few weeks ago. Like when ticket prices go up, and that's coming next year. You got to understand that's gonna help Carolina level the playing field from the NIL perspective.
And I think honestly, because I forget which school did it recently, most people are probably okay with that. Like if it's a 10% raise, now if you're saying that the ticket is double the price, okay, then we may have an issue. But if you're just raising it 10% and that money that you're paying is going to NIL, I mean, honestly, how many people do you think are really going to have an issue with that, especially for Tar Heel basketball games? I don't think many people will take that much issue with that.
No, exactly not. Now, looking at this 2025 class moving forward, you've got 2 commits that are 4 stars. That again, I feel like those are the cornerstone pieces of the class, and they're really the cornerstone pieces of the program moving forward. You mentioned the name though, Caleb Wilson, the 5-star in-state prospect. That's where Carolina is going to turn their attention, and that's probably ultimately what's going to make or break this recruiting class in terms of being a outright success or not. And so, Carolina behind the 8 ball already. I know a lot of people believe that Kentucky has already done a lot to really put themselves in a position to secure his commitment at some point. Arkansas, with their NIL resources, with John Calipari on the sidelines, they're going to be a factor for every major recruit moving forward for the foreseeable future. But for Carolina, this is now the guy. Like you went all in on AJ Dybantsa. You were not able to close the deal. Maybe you can you offer the same NIL commitments. You meet his NIL demands and hope being the face of the class as an in-state prospect that could be the guy that takes this program into its next chapter under its head coach is enough of a selling point to get that guy into your program, because you with the guys like Derek Dixon, Isaiah Dennis, those are good building blocks, but those are not guys that are ready to be the face of a program like Caleb Wilson potentially could be next season.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a headliner, and that's kind of what you're looking for at this point. Also doesn't help, or doesn't hurt, rather, that Caleb Wilson is a guy that's got a little bit of size on him, 6'9", could potentially grow a little bit. So that, potentially could be the guy that could help you out at the 5 position moving forward. That's where the bulk of the attention has to be focused now. And if you find a way to end up landing him, then I think all of these concerns that people have had and have been expressing about this recruiting class, I'm not going to say they completely go out the window, but it will certainly ease a lot of those. If you don't land him, then I think full panic ensues. Now, should it? I don't know if you should necessarily be there, because here's the thing. Carolina's had small recruiting classes before. They've had classes that didn't necessarily have a headliner. But I will say that those pretty much came when Carolina was still being investigated by the NCAA. Roy Williams did a great job of making those rosters work. The thing that Hubert has to his advantage is you've got the transfer portal, but that's the thing. We saw this past year that Carolina isn't exactly killing it there either. So, man, I think Caleb Wilson is one that would be such a relief on so many fronts for Carolina to land. But as you said, Arkansas and Kentucky are the 2 teams that right now are pushing incredibly hard for him. So Carolina's got to find a way to stand out, whether that's offering a significant amount of money or just establishing that good of a connection with him where they don't have to pay nearly as much money, but can still convince him to commit. That's the focus that Carolina should be looking at right now.
And let's not also shy away from saying this. What's happening on the court right now also has to change too.
Yep.
Because when you're doing this for now the third year under Hubert Davis in his 4 years, which is not meeting expectations in the preseason in the first month or so of the year. Like, look, man, I'm not going to sit here and say that his job is on the line, but Carolina, the first month of the year, has not looked like a tournament team. And they've got their work cut out for them to become a team that makes the NCAA tournament. If Hubert Davis were to miss a second tournament in 4 years, I don't know how confidently I could say he'd be Carolina's head coach next year. I'm not sitting here advocating for him to get fired. I don't think it's in the best interest for the program for them to be going through another head coaching search 4 years after the fact of the retirement of Roy Williams. But this is something that is it's a real talking point, that this has been a team that is right now underachieving. And it underachieved 2 years ago. And if you go back to his first season, I mean, we all know what that team was staring down before they won that game at Duke, which was if they would not have won that game, that was not going to be a tournament team. So, and there's not a reasonable justification in the world for 3 times out of 4 years for North Carolina basketball to be a bubble squad. And make no mistake about it, these recruits are as aware as they have ever been. And you know, as much as we want to believe they're committing to a program, these players are committing to coaches too. And the potential unknown of Hubert Davis will make it harder on the recruiting trail. Carolina turns this around, and they finish the month out strong, and they go on to win 16 games in the ACC and are a top 4, and then they earn a respectable seed in the tournament, then this conversation goes out the window. But if we continue to see the level of basketball be played that we've seen the last couple of weeks, then the conversation around his job security, unfortunately, will heat up as the season moves along, which will make it hard for him to adequately recruit the type of talent we want, the type of talent that we need in Chapel Hill.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, you kind of wonder if it did factor into Dybantsa a little bit. Even if Carolina was willing to actually match that number, there could have been uncertainty as to whether or not Hubert Davis was going to end up being there. The guy that offers him the chance to be on his squad, the guy that's heading up the recruitment and trying to get him all this money, he could end up being gone at the end of this season. And then you're committed to who knows. I mean, we have a good idea of who could possibly be that next hire, of course, for Carolina. But, I mean, for him, maybe he doesn't have nearly as much familiarity. He probably has no idea. And so that's probably another element of this, even if it's a very small element. That's something that is going to stick in the back of the minds of any guys that are making their decisions right now. Now, it looks like it's pretty much just come down to Dybantsa committing today and Caleb Wilson as guys that waited this long. But that could be a factor with Caleb Wilson as well. If they're going to land his commitment, they have to start winning games, because the more that narrative starts to build up that this team can miss the tournament, if they miss the tournament, Hubert Davis could be gone at the end of the year. Man, recruits are hearing that. They're hearing that from other coaches. They're looking on social media and seeing that kind of stuff. And if that is a scenario, why would you want to commit to that? Like, no one can blame kids for not wanting to commit to a coach that could be gone at the end of the year. So you're right, man. It's definitely on this team to turn it around. I think, Hubert, we've talked about some of the adjustments that he has to make, but also his players got to help him out, man. You got to execute the stuff that we need you to execute. We saw a much better defensive performance from Carolina in the game on Saturday against Georgia Tech. That type of stuff has to carry over. And hopefully these shots can start falling for these guys because, yeah, your coach's job might be on the line. You have absolutely no clue. The standard here at Carolina is different than the standard at a lot of other schools. He survived the first time that he missed the NCAA tournament. Big reason why was because of the success that he had the previous year. This time around, I'm not sure that ends up happening. And so it's up to these guys to really find a way to help their coach not have to be put in that position, and in turn help them for the future by potentially helping them land some guys on the recruiting trail.
Well, it is going to wrap up this edition of the Four Corners podcast. In the meantime, guys, we're going to direct you to the website. That's HeelToughBlog.com. Full coverage of A.J. Dybantsa's commitment can be found there. Go and read the article about him not choosing Carolina and where Carolina moves forward in their recruiting process for the 2025 class. Also, we've got you covered wall to wall on the latest around Carolina's head football coach, the rumors around Bill Belichick coming to UNC, and who's potentially in charge of making that hire. We have you covered with all that. More players in the transfer portal today, headlined by Travis Shaw. Articles up about each guy that has entered the portal, and Chip Lindsey is off to Michigan to be their new offensive coordinator. We have you covered on every bit of news coming out of Carolina football and what has been a crazy whirlwind of a time the last week or so. So just going to continue to encourage you guys to visit the website. That's HeelToughBlog.com every morning, afternoon, and evening for your latest and your best coverage of Carolina basketball, Tar Heel football. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform. Simply search the Four Corners Podcast. We will pop up. There, we encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any editions of the show throughout the remainder of the basketball season. Well, with that, guys, this is going to wrap up this edition of the show. I do want to thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.